Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Accommodation Show. I'm joined today by Barry Robinson from Wyndham. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi Bart. Thanks. It's great to be on the show. So lovely day here on the Gold Coast. Good to be back in Australia.
Oh, I didn't know that you were in the Gold Coast. I imagine that it's good times, good weather, and is that where you live as well?
No, I actually reside in Singapore, but we still have a large presence down here in Australia, and our corporate office is here on the Gold Coast, so which is an ideal spot to visit, especially today to turn the weather on, and the surf's nice and clean. The water is beautiful out there at the moment.
Yeah, so for anyone that's listening that hasn't been to the Gold Coast, it's a wonderful location. We did a conference up there 2-3 months ago, and when I wasn't at the conference, I was at the beach, so I do really understand that location. But look, you're very hard to get hold of, Barry, so I'm gonna get straight into our topic of today, which is around profitability. So profitability in hotels accommodation into 2023 and how to become more profitable and some of our predictions. But look, before I get into it, Barry, I'd love you to sort of introduce yourself, let everybody know where you're from and what your role entails.
Okay, so originally from New Zealand. I've been in the hospitality industry for most of my life on and off. My parents were in the sector, so from an early age I was brought up, changing beds and doing dishes and all those not so pleasant jobs that as a young kid we were sort of forced as child labour, so to speak. But anyway, it was a really good learning curve, and sort of got me ingrained in the hospitality business and sort of installed in my blood. And then from there I spent probably 12 years, maybe 12 to 14 years in my early stages up in Asia, in different parts of Asia, operating hotels as general manager in Indonesia, China. And then back to Singapore, where I'm based this second time. So I did come down to Australia, after Asia, and spent 14 years recently down here, or 15 years with my family. And that was when we did an acquisition. I was with Choice Hotels, and we bought, I don't know if you remember, Bart, there was a group called Flag Ends, which was a large group of a conglomerate throughout Australia, a lot of regional properties, and we acquired that, and that's how Choice really got its foothold in Australia and converted the Flag Inns over to Qualities, Clarions, and Comforts, and then from there I broke away and ventured into what was the vacation ownership business then. I didn't know anything about it. I was approached by a Fortune 100 called Sendant Corporation that owned a variety of businesses. They owned Avis and Budget rental cars in those days. They owned all the hotel brands that Wyndham have now, bar a few that they've acquired recently, but Ramadas and Howard Johnson's and so on. So it was an exciting group to join. That's 19 years ago and nearly coming up to 20 years when I joined them. So it's been a really interesting ride, and we had a small business in Australia at that stage, Australia and Fiji, and really not a very big presence from a hotel perspective. And over those years, we're able to grow both our vacation ownership business and our hotel business, not only in the South Pacific, but up into Asia, which, we've expanded dramatically up in Asia of recent times.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I think I was talking to someone the other day about the size of Australia in comparison to the rest of the world. I think they were saying something like, "Oh, Florida is the same size as the whole of Australia," and I was sort of scratching my head, going, "Oh, okay, cool. It's a tiny territory, but with a lot of opportunity as well, right?"
Well, look, Australia is really vast, and cross proximity to New Zealand. There's a lot of cross pollination between those two countries. They're both seen as clean, green, and adventurous places, safe places to visit. So, from an attractive perspective for not only Asia but North America and Europe, coming down this way, definitely attractive places for people to visit. And obviously, we were going through globalization prior to the pandemic, where we've sort of shifted back to deglobalization. Flights were relatively frequent, easy, and inexpensive prior to 2019. And so the pandemic's put a little bit of a damper on that. But what it has done is it's really increased, and especially our focus on domestic tourism. And we saw that through the pandemic. I don't see that going away for the next couple of years. So, we talk about profitability and opportunity. I think for those that, can, swing if they're not focused on that and focus on the domestic market, I think that's really where it's at the moment, especially with, where I don't see the airline switching and reducing the prices before the middle of next year anyway, at least. And, most of us have done a little trip overseas since the pandemic, or people that I've spoken to, and, go to prepare to book their next one and go, holy crap, what's happened to the prices? And this is where I see the flick of people going, well, maybe we should see our home country, whether that's New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, or wherever. So we're really entrenched in focusing on that domestic tourism market, and there's some great offerings.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, I think that leads us straight into our topic of the day. So, if we're talking about profitability and what's going to happen next, being well prepared for it is going to set us up in good stead for being more profitable. I'm super interested in what you said, where obviously that we're going to be becoming more globalized. Now it's sort of the other direction, but the domestic traveler was incredibly important during COVID and coming out of COVID. And if we look at airline prices, and I know this, that where it doesn't matter where you are in the world, flights are expensive. If you look at how much you're paying per kilometer, even if you're in Australia, you feel it's expensive, but it's very similar with other airlines across the world. So it's not a location thing. It's just flights are expensive to get around. But the one thing that I am seeing is that domestic demand, it doesn't seem to be as good as it was 6 months ago. And the prices you can command for a room, yes, they're higher, but occupancy is starting to drop. And also when people are booking, it used to be you'd have 6 months or 9 months ahead of time, you'll know that people are coming, but now it seems to be a lot more last minute. So I'd love to unpack the sort of why you think that domestic demand is going to stay where it is. Or get better, or
well, look, we're not seeing that. So in the Gold Coast, you've had a couple of ups and downs, but generally, occupancy and average room rates are much higher than prior to 2019. So that was just one market. I mean, there are markets that are still softer. So if we look at Port Douglas, which we're reliant on the international market, that could have a greater domestic push, and we need some of the local councils and local tourism bodies to help support the local businesses up there, and promoting the attractions of those destinations. I think we'll still see short travel between, even if with air prices increasing between New Zealand and Australia, because maybe it's $600 instead of $400 or $800, but it's not $3,000 instead of $1,500.
Sure.
So I think between those countries, and also the Australian currency is relatively weak, and New Zealand currency at the moment. So going internationally for our domestic population of 24 million people, a lot of them are going to look twice about going overseas and maybe defer their overseas travel and go domestically. So I think COVID was interesting because there was pent up demand, and everyone all of a sudden rushed out and either went wherever they could because they couldn't get internationally anywhere, and especially with the domestic regional. But I think that's also been good because people have gone to places like Stanthorpe or whatever and gone, hey, it was actually pretty good going out here. We may go out there again, or let's go and explore somewhere else. So it's really got that domestic population to I'm a big proponent of seeing your own country before you head abroad as well, because so many times you speak to people, and even my grandmother. She was like, I think 80 before I took her down to the South Island in New Zealand, and couldn't believe how beautiful it was. Yet she had been to the United States and all over the world. So it's something that we've got to figure out how we do that better. We, as a population, we seem to get fascinated with things abroad versus the offering that we have here at home. So I'm really supportive of whether it's a Gold Coast Tourism Board or Sydenham Tourism Board or whatever, to getting behind them to to push the attractiveness of the local attractions, not only in the cities but especially out in some of the rural areas.
Yeah. Look, I definitely agree. I definitely agree that I think that sentiment will still be there. And I think that what you said before, if you can do that one international trip and then it gets pretty expensive for that next one. I do wonder about that price sensitivity that people will have, though, because even now, if you travel domestically, you're paying almost double for accommodation, if not, 40 or 50% over what you were in the past. And as those, as the inflationary pressures go up, and then you've got your interest rates, which are going up as well. So you've got all those pressures. So I wonder, the traveler demographic as well, whether that's going to change, whether it's the same sort of people, whether you're going to have different people visiting. Have you had any thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's going to be easy the next year. I think it's going to be rocky, but I think there is a captive audience in that domestic market, and some of the younger generation that typically goes abroad. I think there's an opportunity to attract them travelling domestically, around Australia. I see, we're talking about, really about the profitability of properties, whatever, whether it's a hotel, motel, a caravan park, or whatever it is. And you've got to have a look at what are some of the controllable costs and things that maybe you can look at, mitigating or reducing on a go forward basis. So, such as, power, the fixed cost of power. We see that power is going to, increase probably, double digit growth in the next year, going into 2024. How do you move, quicker maybe into solar or into long-term contracts? I know with AAOA or the Accommodation or Hotel Association, or what's going to be called soon the Australian Accommodation Association, the new merged bodies. They're working with the industry to secure long-term rates, 7 to 10 year rates in different areas. So they've done, one pack in Sydney. They're working on another one now, I think, in Western Australia and other markets. So, I think for operators, there's certain things we can control and certain things we can't control. We can't control that there's no labour around at the moment, so you've got to get what you can. But I'm a firm believer that's going to switch. I think we're going to have a non-shortage of labour by the middle of next year, or to the third quarter of next year. You're going to ask yourself, where have all the people gone? Because it's not as if there's another planet and everyone's just shifted to another planet. So there will be a return. I think it's just a matter of time. I mean, some people have been sitting on the sideline, either they're utilising their savings or with the grants and so on that the government have handed out. And I think with the inflationary pressures, with the interest rates changing, and the economic dynamicness that's changing quite rapidly at the moment, I think you'll see that change in the labour force. So I'm less concerned about the labour component. What I'm always concerned about is the quality of the labour and the people that we recruit. So we spend a lot more time on recruitment. We're actually probably classified as a real slow recruiter, and we go through quite a rigorous process to make sure that we get someone that understands our culture and what we're really, what's in our DNA, and that they're going to fit in with us and we're going to fit in with them. So it's just sort of a two-way street from our perspective, and that seems to be working reasonably well. And I must say, most of our top talent has been homegrown, whether that's in our general managers or our vacation ownership business or in our corporate business and our consumer finance business. Most of them are people that we've brought in at the lower levels and sort of rapidly trained them and grown them, which is really rewarding and exciting as a leader. I mean, that's the best reward you can have, is to see someone develop through your organisation.
Yeah. So, a few things I want to unpack a little bit there. So, one of them you said about cutting costs, and one of the things that I feel is that when COVID hit, everyone was cutting costs quite dramatically to manage to survive. And now you're talking as well. It's kind of almost managing costs, right? Re-looking at all your contracts and finding those different opportunities within the business to either become more efficient or, like you said, to establish longer term contracts. Insurance is another one, which is a huge cost that just keeps on going up at the moment. Are there any other thoughts that you have in terms of the cost cutting side of things? And what would you say to someone that's listening that's saying, you know what, Barry, I've done it all already. I've cut the cost as far as I possibly can.
Look, I'm not a big proponent on just raw cost
Cost
cutting.
cutting.
Sorry, we'll get that right. Cost cutting. What I am, especially through COVID, we managed to, maintain and hold on to the majority of our staff right through COVID, and where possible, we were opening resorts, and we weren't operating as a COVID property or COVID hotels either. So this was, raw operating costs. What we did do to go against the grain is to sort of reflect on our business and say, well, how can we change or modify our business to, attract and retain our customer, and retain a different type of customer. And so we went down the experiential route and challenged all of our general managers with coming up with how could they create some unique offerings, especially for our Club Wyndham members, to create a point of difference at each of our properties. So, there were different things that we did at different resorts. So in Tasmania, our general manager created a hobby farm down there. Now we've got all sorts of things. We've got not only fresh green veggie patches, but we've got a house cow. We've got chickens that are laying eggs. We've got llamas. We've got sheep, and it just created a really unique experience for our guests coming through, and especially for our club environment. Got people asking about, well, what is this Club Wyndham all about? Down in Phillip Island. We're on a reasonable size block of land down there, probably 40 acres, I think we're on. We've got outdoor cinemas. We've got free kids pedal-powered go-karts. We've got electric bikes, scooters, and surfboards and boogie boards. In Ballarat, we created a gold sluice to keep in with the environment down there. So, for my thing, whether it's those big things or the small things, what are the unique propositions that you're offering at your property? Whether it's a caravan park, whether it's a Airbnb, what's the surprise and delight? Because we can cut costs, but the more important thing is, how do you drive revenue? And so I'm really about driving revenue, and how do you modify? So you've got to be cost conscious, but you don't want to cut costs that it's going to sacrifice your offering to your consumer, because long term, that's going to kill your business anyway.
Yeah, I love where you're going with this, Barry. I can sniff it already, that we're saying domestic travelers and we're going into experiences to increase that profitability. I love it, and this is something that we talk about a lot on this show and within our businesses. What are your USPs? What makes you unique, especially in a competitive environment? It really begs a couple of questions from me. Probably the more complicated. So there's two of them, actually. Let's start off with this one. So in terms of identifying those unique experiences, and you said you challenged your managers to come up with some ideas. Do you have any strategies or any thoughts of how people can kind of get themselves into the right headspace, into going, all right, well, I've got this, and how do I create those experiences? How do I start to think of things in that way? What are my opportunities? How do we get into that mindset?
Well, I think first of all, travel yourself and put yourself in the consumer's position. So, my take always when I'm going into a property or thinking about, our offerings is, if I was the consumer coming in, what would I like? What do I want as my first touch point? I mean, the first touch point is when you're making your reservation, your engagement up front, and how are you interacting with that consumer when they first touch you? What are the things that you're sending out to them? Are we just sending out, a plain confirmation, or are we sending out an inviting, exciting note to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, really excited about you coming to our property. You might not know this, but there's some really unique things. We've got, 10 ducks on our lake. They've just laid eggs. Hopefully they're going to, hatch when you arrive, or something like that. Or we've got a bread damper making session, or we're milking the cow, or whatever it may be. There's always something there. Or we've got really neat restaurants around us. Would you like us to make a special reservation because we know the owners down there, and you'll have a great experience? I mean, those are the things for me. I travel, prior to COVID, 272 days of the year. So, to walk into a property or have some unique sort of engagement, or a staff member that, that just lights up your day, that's what counts for me. Or a little something special in the room, just different things. I mean, one of the island resorts, they had, welcome Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, or Barry and Lee on a coconut. They carved out on a coconut. It cost them nothing. But, it was just saying, wow, that's actually great. It fitted the environment.
Yeah, it's really fascinating as well because of the way that we use technology and the internet now. It's almost a lot of these wow moments, if they're Instagrammable, there's actually kind of like a direct correlation between you doing that action and driving a positive return on investment.
100%. So, classic example of this. We created a hotel in Brisbane, which was called Trip. It was the first Trip hotel in Brisbane in the Fortitude Valley. And it was a hybrid between two brands we had. We had one brand was Trip, the other brand was Dream. Dream was a little bit more funkier than Trip. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to merge the two brands, which we did. With our GM, who's now our head of resort operations, a chap called Warren Cullum, who did a fantastic job. And we turned that with the developer. The developer was a chap called Jay McPhee. And we created a graffiti theme. So throughout the hotel, it was all about street art. The outside of the hotel was all street art. There was a famous mural of a lady's face on the whole outside of the property. Each of the floors were done by famous street artists that, in those days, they were just getting started. And to your point, all of our marketing, actually, when we interviewed for that property, people had to send in a video as why they would fit into the Trip model. And we didn't have proper uniforms then. We created uniforms that they were comfortable in. They were T-shirts with street art on it and whatever, something that they could actually, they were comfortable because of the younger generation. They were comfortable to go out for lunch or to the bar with straight after work. So that was sort of the theme. We brought in this really great bunch of unique, engaging individuals, and that property, from opening went off the charts, especially from an Instagram perspective. Everyone wanted to go there and take photos, post it on Instagram. We had some spas and TV set up out on a couple of the rooms on the balcony, so you'd have them, in the balconies taking all sorts of shots. Some of them were censored, but most of them were able to be publicised. But it was a great project, and it was a really good learning for all of us. So we're about to open up another trip down in Adelaide in South Australia. So the challenge for the team is how do they trump what we did in Brisbane from a social media perspective, because we didn't spend a lot of money on pure traditional marketing. It was all through social networks, and it was through people promoting their own experiences, not about us promoting the experiences.
Yeah. What I find fascinating as well is that it's very obvious to me that you're also realigning your guest avatar and looking into 2023 and where you think people are going to be and which target markets you want to actually look at in terms of people that are coming. But I'm very conscious as well, we're starting to get short on time. And there was one other thing I really wanted to ask you, and I also need you to wrap up because there might be some other things that we haven't talked about which were very important, which I want everyone to at least hear it before we finish. But on this experiences point, when you run a disparate group like you guys have, it can be very difficult to know whether the experiences are on brand. How are you dealing with that?
Not all of them are on brand, but that's what makes them unique. So look, the brands are there for a purpose to create, some uniformity to a certain degree. But you have to provide flexibility and empowerment to your staff. Otherwise, you're not going to create the hospitality or the hospitable experience that we should be providing at any property, whether it's a 2-star property through to a 5-star property. So, otherwise you're going to be too starch and stiff. So, yes, there are brand guidelines around signage and certain other aspects that we follow most of the time. But you've also got to work with your developers. I mean, what are they actually wanting, and what can they actually afford? Because sometimes we'll stipulate it must be this type of marble, but you could get something else that's half the price and looks relatively the same. So are you going to enforce that? From profitability and a return on investment, no, you shouldn't be. So, from our perspective, I think, from a Wyndham Hotels and Resorts perspective, we work diligently with, our developers, our vacation ownership business. We're fortunate enough to have our own capital. So, I get the luxury of developing whatever I think is appropriate in the market. And we've been able to do some really creative things. We just, my recent one was we bought the Peppers Resort up in Early Beach, and spend another probably $15-20 million on that, revamping it, and created some really unique 3 and 4 bedroom presidential units that are probably the best in the marketplace up there. So, it's exciting to be able to do that, and that's the good thing about having your own capital.
Love it. Now, are there any other points that you wanted to bring up today in terms of profitability as we wrap this up?
Well, I think from our business perspective, I mean, where we've been successful is operating a mixed use environment. So we run our hotel and timeshare business in parallel together, and being able to buy, into a property and run part of that property as a vacation ownership property and the rest as a hotel. There's benefits for both parties, benefits for us as a vacation ownership operator and from the hotel perspective, because timeshare runs typically at high 80s to 90% occupancies year in, year out, whether that's through a recession and even through COVID, when we were actually able to operate, our occupancies were up into the high 80s, which means that we're paying for those underlying common area costs, which means that from a hotel perspective, they're able to yield up and get a much more higher, greater return from a GOP perspective. So, that model's really accelerated our growth in not only the South Pacific, but also up in the Asian market. So I suppose what I'm saying is, whatever your asset is, whether it's a caravan park or whatever, I mean, how do you better utilize the space? Have you got cabins on there? Is there something, another offering you could put on there that would give you a better return for your land bank? So I think you just need to look at it's case by case.
Yeah. I love it. There's just so many great ideas, and as you've probably realized, Barry, we could probably go back to all of them and sit down and do another half an hour episode on each of those topics, from cutting costs to providing unique experiences to mixed use of your property, and the list will go on. But I think you've got some really great insights for 2023 and given some people some hope of things to think about and to think about things differently and to think once again and go back and look at what those USPs are and look at their costs as well, because it's, even because you've done it 2 years ago doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it again to schedule out for 2023. Barry, are there any final thoughts that you would like to add for today?
No, I think, just again, it's all, we're in the people business, so we're going to make sure that you got the right people around you, and when you do have them, make sure
Mm.
you reward them and look after them, because they're hard to get hold of, and you can't do everything yourself. So it's really a team effort, and I'm fortunate enough to have a great team in our organisation, and they do a fantastic job. So yeah, I just I love the hospitality industry. I think there's a long road ahead. It is changing. We should make it change. It's we've got to lead it. Those that are in the sector, it's dynamic. So let's continue to make it even more dynamic.
Yeah, beautiful. All right. Well, look, thank you so much once again. Folks, if you are listening to the podcast, make sure you leave us a note, give us a like, 5-star ratings, all of that. If you're watching it on YouTube, then a subscribe, a like, some comments. Let us know what your thoughts are for 2023. Barry, thank you so much for coming on and spending your time imparting us with your sizable knowledge. And giving us your thoughts about the future. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Bart, and thanks for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.